Okay, good afternoon. We are going to open now the next session, which will be chaired by Keren Elazari. Keren is a senior researcher at the Yuval Workshop for Science, Technology and Security. She has a lot of experience in cyber work, not only research. And recently she gave a TED talk. I think the number of listeners were a few millions. And she will chair this session. Keren, I don't see in the darkness, but should be somewhere there. Keren, please come.
Thank you, Itzik. Can you guys hear me? Perfect. So, first of all, I'd like to say I'm very excited to be here today. I'm very excited to open this session. And this session is going to be about a topic which is probably at the heart of everything we do here at the Yuval Workshop, here at Tel Aviv University, here in Israel. You know, we started this conference 4 years ago, in 2010. Since then, more than 100 new Israeli cybersecurity startups started their activity in Israel. And according to IVC research, they've raised more than $400 million in funding. 20 international companies, in fact more than 20 international companies, now have their R&D centers or centers of excellence for cybersecurity research here in Israel. And the reason for all of that is one word, and it's not 8200. That word is innovation. In my years working in the cybersecurity industry here in Israel and abroad, and especially in my time working with the Israeli military, I've learned one key lesson about innovation and the unique situation that we have here in Israel. And we can sum that up in 3 words. Pressure makes diamonds. And I think that is the singular description for the Israeli tendency for incredible innovation under unmatched pressure. Today we're going to have a fascinating discussion about how the unique Israeli industry and the defense and military side contributes to cybersecurity innovation. We're going to hear a little bit about how huge companies, 500-pound gorillas, are struggling to innovate. We'll see if we can learn any lessons from global perspectives, from incredible analysts, defense professionals, and other executives. Now, I'd like to, before I introduce our speakers for this session, I'd like to say a few words about the importance of innovation. We talk a lot about new cybersecurity technologies and what they can offer, but there is another side to the coin of innovation, and that is that the bad guys are not afraid to innovate. We've all heard about the recent attacks, and there is no major brand company, technology, retail, financial, or defense, that has not been implicated with a breach. The reason for that is that the bad guys are not afraid to try out new things. They're not afraid to collaborate. They're not afraid to use new technology in a clever way or old technology in a new way. And that means we have to work that much harder on using the innovative technologies in a clever way. Now, for our first session speaker, I'd like to mention that the Israeli chief scientist, Mr. Avi Hasson, was due to join us today. However, he was called for a government cabinet meeting, as one does. So it is my honor, my distinct honor, to introduce our first speaker that will help us start the discussion about cybersecurity, about innovation, but more importantly about what we can expect in the next few years. What are the trends that are going to influence how we innovate and what new technologies we're going to use? Our first speaker for this session is Secretary Gordon England. He is a partner with Glilot Venture Capital. He is the former Deputy Secretary of the United States Defense Ministry. He's led a distinguished business career in the United States defense sector, including many years as an executive vice president with General Dynamics. Mr. England served under President George W. Bush as the first Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security when that office was formed in 2002. Later, he was the 29th Deputy Secretary of Defense. Right now, he is a member of Glilot Venture Capital Partners, which is the first micro fund focused on cybersecurity innovation in Israel. Mr. Gordon England also chairs several U.S. technology companies, and he is an active member of the United States National Academy of Engineering. Mr. Gordon, if you would please take the stage. Help me in welcoming him. Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure to have you.
So Keren, thank you very much, and thanks for a very, very nice introduction. It's too bad my parents aren't here. My father would have been impressed with that introduction, and my mother would have believed it all. Keren asked me, she said, how do I address you? Do I address you Mr. Secretary, Mr. Deputy, Mr. England? I said, well, most people now address me as Mr. Has-Been. So first, I do want to say it is a distinct pleasure to be here. And I thank you, Keren, for the invite to be part of this great program today. I have many, many friends in Israel. I have been coming to Israel for over 35 years. I tell people I have a lot of family in Israel, adoptive family, but nonetheless family. So I joined and I invested with Glilot Capital Partners, the very first cyber-focused VC fund. I did that because, frankly, it was a way for me to stay engaged here in Israel and engaged with a lot of my friends here. But it's also to work with what I view as the defining and the most disruptive technology of our era, so I was particularly interested in that. And by the way, hopefully in this technology, there's room to actually make money. Now, when Glilot Capital was starting, and by the way, I have notes if you don't mind, but Keren's a very tough moderator. She said, I'm going to limit you to 10 or 12 minutes, so I thought I better write this down or I'll go way over. So when Glilot Capital was started about 4 years ago, it was clear that due to the huge investment on the cyber attack side, cyber defense needed some massive investment in terms of capital, and it needed some significant innovation. It was necessary to close the gap between the attacker and the defender and to provide organizations with better techniques to defend their networks. So 4 years have now passed since this was started, and it seems today that many more people understand this situation. More VCs are investing in this space, and a new generation of cybersecurity companies is now emerging. Still, as digital technology continues to emerge and as attackers continue to invest heavily on innovative attack techniques, additional and significant defense innovation is needed to protect government, corporate, and other networks. Now, attackers still have the advantage. The cost of entry is relatively low, and there's high payoff. And attackers can probe and they can experiment without repercussions. So consequently, the cyber attack space attracts hackers for fun and profit, along with criminals, terrorists, and nation states, and each with different objectives. Therefore, the cyber defense side needs to address a wide spectrum of threats, leaving lots of room for innovation. Now, for countries and large multinationals, the greatest threat is from nation states, although organized and well-funded terrorists are not far behind. So I have 5 observations to make today. And so my first observation, when dealing with high-end threats, my view is that cyber of necessity will need to move from discrete development of defense, disrupt, and destruction functions to more highly integrated and automated response systems. Due to the spectrum of damage that a cyber attack can impose on an adversary, defenders must be able to not just detect an attack, but to sense an attack, and ideally have self-healing networks. What's critical is to maintain operations while under and after an attack. either by temporarily shutting down systems and or automatically going to alternate modes of operation. And all this has to be initiated quickly, micro, nano, or even faster, which implies fully automated systems. When I was Secretary of the Navy, I used to say sort of tongue-in-cheek, that is somewhat humorously, that the Navy needed to go back to signal flags. Remember the old signal flag, ship to ship? And they need to go back to basic celestial navigation and the like as a backup to the cyber attack. Now, I will tell you, though, that was only partially in jest because, frankly, most developed societies have lost all the skills that may be necessary as a backup to all the sophisticated systems they have today. My second observation is that cyber is what I call a big systems game. That is, especially when integrated with intel and military operations to generate synchronized effects. So if you think of NSA, Keith Alexander, my good friend, was here today. They have 38,000 people. When you think of a large U.S. defense integration contractor or any of the large networking companies. However, while the complexities of cyber tend to require big systems with large investments by government and companies, innovation is still largely occurring from what I call big brains in small company environments. So in a constantly expanding and changing digital world, and with your creative attack side, defense will require flexibility and agility. And that's generally not associated with large bureaucratic institutions. Now, the model seems to be, on the defense side, innovation of small companies, and then those small companies being acquired at premium prices by large integrators. And that's the experience at Glilot. Frankly, many U.S. companies now are flush with cash. That is, they have lots of cash. And it is quicker and cheaper for them to buy the technology than it is to develop it on their own. And frankly, what better place to buy it than here in Israel, which is the hotbed of cyber innovation. And then alternately, some of these large companies are actually standing up their own operations here in Israel. So my third point, stress systems. A system that's already stressed is more vulnerable to attack because they are less resilient. And now here's a macro example. So in a very macro case, the financial systems and the governance of many developed countries, so think about developed countries, particularly countries in Europe, some countries in Europe, but other ones, they are at risk because they are already facing economic and financial crises, and that will likely continue to deteriorate because of irreversible social and political forces. And as the finances of these developed countries become more stressed, they also become more vulnerable to a variety of attacks on their financial systems and infrastructure. Now, here it would be very helpful, and I did hear a part of Keith Alexander's talk this morning about the importance of cooperation, and I agree, except while it would be helpful if companies and countries could share cyber techniques, that would be extraordinarily helpful. But the problem is, frankly, that companies do not want to compromise their proprietary and their competitive data. And if a company has been attacked, it does not want to expose their vulnerabilities. And countries, in addition to companies, also have reluctance to share unless they have special relationships. So my judgment is that cooperation is necessary. Hopefully it'll come about, but I tell you it's not easy to do. It is hard work to get that level of cooperation. Now, perhaps most important, and my fourth observation, is that government bureaucracies, regulations, and social issues could very likely override, negate, and severely limit the technology advances, innovation, and effectiveness of cyber systems. And if these constraints prevail, which they seem to be in a lot of countries, then those countries and institutions in those countries will be at a fatal disadvantage in the cyber exchange. Now here, smaller countries like Israel have an advantage because you have better internal coordination and communication. Countries like Russia and China with centralized control also have an advantage. But frankly, countries like the United States and many of the European countries with very liberal media and left-leaning governments, they tend to limit cyber effectiveness and the operating spectrum that you can operate over. So for example, in the United States, monitoring of networks is limited because of citizen privacy concerns, and so that builds in some inherent limitations in terms of your defense systems. Also, if you feel you need to respond to an attack, I mean, frankly, in a large enterprise, large countries, it takes an undue amount of time, hours or even days. That's certainly not compatible with my earlier comment about automated response systems. So lastly, point number 5. We need to be mindful that human interactions will continue to operate side by side with cyber systems to exfiltrate data and inject damaging software that can override embedded and sophisticated security measures. So Edward Snowden, everybody knows Edward Snowden, a former NSA contractor. We all know Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, well known for their exfiltration and publication of classified U.S. military intel and diplomatic documents. I would guess that Edward Snowden negated probably literally tens of billions of dollars of security safeguards. Security safeguards all put in place against outside threats. And Keith Alexander, to quote him again, because just a couple of days ago he was quoted in the Wall Street Journal, and he may have mentioned this morning, I didn't hear his whole talk, but he described the continued cyber exfiltration, ransacking of American companies as the greatest transfer of wealth in history. And he may be right, but I also wonder how much classified and proprietary data is exfiltrated on a disk drive or some other highly dense storage device by employees who either willfully neglected the security measures, not overtly, they just neglect to do it, or they may be disgruntled and may be selling data to an adversary. And also networks can be damaged or compromised from within, simple to compromise. Just take a disk drive from a classified computer to an unclassified computer, and you've destroyed the security. So you can also damage or compromise from within, opening gateways for other cyber attacks. So my message here is that cyber defense is necessary, but it's also not sufficient. If you're managing the enterprise, the human element also needs constant attention. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.